Hi there, this is Julia from Grad Schools Pro, and this is going to be the third part out of a series of 6 videos where I'm going to go into how to write a scientific paper using the IDEAS framework. So first, we're going to recap the IDEAS framework very briefly. We're going to talk about the title of your paper, the authors and co-authors. Then we're going to talk about writing style and what to do and what not to do. And then we're going to go into the methods and then the introduction section. So let's recap very briefly what the IDEAS framework is. So IDEAS stands for I is imagine, and that basically means you're going to prepare for writing the paper without actually starting the writing process yet. Then D stands for draft and document. So where you're actually going to start writing, so you're going to draft the methods and document what you did. Then the E stands for establish and express, where you establish a storyline of what your paper is going to be about and express your thoughts and write them down. And then after that, the A stands for adjust, where you're going to finalize the sections and actually edit your paper. And then lastly, S stands for submit, which is really the goal for you to do here. Again, this IDEAS framework is something that I've been using to write and publish my own papers for 17 plus years. I actually, while I did not like the process at the beginning, I now really love writing papers, and I can do this really with a lot of fun in a matter of weeks instead of months to years. I've been using this framework to go from 1.5 years of writing for my first paper. We went through 18 iterations. It was really a nightmare. And the second paper to 2 weeks of writing, 2 weeks of writing with only minimal edits. And I actually got a best paper award for this paper. So really, I've learned something along this process, and which is something what I want to be teaching you. And again, I've taught many grad students, undergrads, and postdocs how to write their paper and publish their papers. And I'd love to teach that to you too, because first of all, I love talking about this stuff, and I also like to see you having fun writing and actually publishing amazing papers. So if you want to learn more about how I write and publish papers, there's a whole bunch of free resources where you can find the links down in the description. So let's talk about the title. And this is something that many people start overthinking at the beginning, and which actually adds to the writer's block. So my suggestion is start with a simple title. So the title is really the first thing that you want to start out with when you start writing your paper. But the problem is your title at this point doesn't matter. So just write something down, write any title down that you think fits, and then move on. And so later on, you're actually going to be able to revisit that title and optimize it, which makes this a lot easier because you know exactly what the paper is going to be about. So authors and co-authors, who are going to be your co-authors on this paper, right? So the question really you have to answer is, who has helped you with anything? Who has contributed any ideas? Who has done any experiments for you? Who has coached you in how to write the paper? Who has really done anything on this paper for you? And who warrants authorship on this? And this could be lab mates, this could be collaborators, this could be supervisors, this could be your collaborator supervisor, things like that. Who has brought in the funding? So these could all be co-authors on the paper, and they should be considered so that you're not stepping on anybody's toes and they don't feel left out if they actually have done something for that paper. So now let's talk about writing style very briefly. And that's something where a lot of people, and especially when you're starting out, are doing things a little bit wrong. So the thought that a lot of people have is, oh, I'm just starting out, so I have to prove myself as a scientist. So I'm just going to write really complicated sentences, really long, windy sentences with a lot of complex words. So that makes me sound smart. Therefore, people will actually acknowledge me as a scientist. And that's really a fallacy, because often the opposite is true. So the simpler the writing style is, the more people you can actually reach with your paper because it's understandable. And I always like to quote Leonardo da Vinci here, because he said, simplicity is the ultimate sophistication. And this holds true for many things in science and in research and in scientific communication, including writing papers. As for the writing style, how to actually do this is really use simple language and clear writing style with short sentences. Don't make sentences super long, and keep them short. So the sentences should follow either the logic or timeline in the sections and in the sentences. So your sections should follow either a specific logic or a timeline in which order you did certain things or experiments. And then also on a sentence level, it should make sense from a logical perspective. So it's not good to say, oh, this happened after we did this, because in that case, the timeline would be reversed and it's more difficult to read. So our brain always thinks in terms of timelines and logic, and therefore you need to write it this way for your audience to be able to understand it. Then also active voice versus passive voice, right? I always recommend using the active voice in about 10 to 20% of the paper and use the passive voice in the rest of the paper. And active voice basically means we express the protein versus passive voice, the protein was expressed. And I always recommend using active voice only in a little bit of a paper, simply because you don't want to sound like you have an ego problem. So if you're always saying like, we did this, I did this, blah, 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 it really sounds like very self-centered, and you want to avoid that. On the other hand, if you would only use passive voice in your paper, it would sound incredibly dry and boring. So you want to break it up a little bit. Where I usually recommend in the method section, where it's pretty clear what you did, this is usually when you use active voice. So let's talk about the method section. I always recommend writing the method section using the brain dump method, and you're probably going to ask what the brain dump method is, and I'm going to be teaching you this in the Zero-To-Published program, where you find the link below in the description. But basically what you're going to be doing is, before you start writing the method section, you're going to create a heading for each subheading, and those headings should be the biggest things that you really did or that are relevant. So if you're, let's say, writing a methods paper, so you have like, okay, we created this database, and then we built this model, and then we analyzed the model. So these would be the headings, and then you would move those sections in a logical order and then fill in the details for these. And this is really in a nutshell how you write your method section. Before we're gonna dive into the introduction, if you like this type of content, if you want to get notified when the next video in the series comes out, go hit the subscribe button, and also please comment below if there's anything that you're struggling with most when writing a paper, because that way I can help you out by making videos specifically for that particular content or to answer your question. Next, we're going to talk about the introduction, and we're also going to write the introduction using the brain dump method. But what we're actually going to do is, first in the introduction, is we're going to talk about the problem statement. So we're going to talk about the why. You have to answer why anybody would be interested in reading your paper, because these days nobody's got time for anything, right? So we want to know what's in it for me before we spend half an hour reading your paper. So after you've written the problem statement in a few sentences, state the current knowledge in the field, read the relevant literature related to the research that you're presenting, answer questions related to what has previously been done, what has been found, what kind of results did people get, and what were the advantages and disadvantages of their research. Is there any way you can improve on that, or are there any unanswered questions that your research is going to answer? In the last paragraph in the introduction, you're going to talk about your idea or your finding or your method, and this is really a very short snippet where you're going to introduce what the rest of the paper is going to be about. So in this last paragraph, you're really going to give a high-level summary, and that really leads the reader into the gist of the paper later on. And that's it for this video. Thank you so much for watching. In this next video, which will be the fourth part of the series, we'll be talking about the express part in the ideas framework, where you actually learn how to write the meat of your paper, meaning the storyline, the resulting discussion, and so on. And I'll see you then.